Democrats split into two separate parties. Ugh, hope this doesn't bite us in the butt. Hello and welcome. I'm Lieutenant Tommy. That's Prospector John, and this is Civil War in Hindsight, a new series that we're starting. It's going to be a 4.5-year-long adventure, assuming we don't go bankrupt first.
Wait, how long?
For 4.5 years, Johnny.
Oh shit, is that how long that war was?
Yeah, that's how long this war is. We're going to follow it week to week in real time, starting next week with the election. We wanted to use this time to be a prelude to kind of explain what the series is going to be about and to kind of kick it off with a little bit of background right before the election. So I'm going to reach into my field desk here, grab out my notes, and we'll get this underway.
I assume and hope those are handwritten with a quill pen.
These are not. Yes, these are handwritten with
There
a
it
quill
is.
pen. I'm going for authenticity. I made sure Johnny drank a period appropriate beer with a Miller High Life, which was around for the Civil War. I'm doing the same thing here.
Yeah, and so I'm really taken to character here instead of my usual IPAs. I'm downgrading.
High Life. Yeah, he is. And these episodes will be about 10 to 15 minutes long. We don't want to make them too terribly long. If you have any questions about how this will look, go over and watch World War II in real time or World War I in real time. We're totally just ripping this off of them. But
Yeah, just their idea, just applied to the Civil War.
Applied to the Civil War. That's exactly it. So first, leading up to the election of 1860. So in the United States, during the 1850s, during the last two presidential administrations of Franklin Pierce and James Buchanan, things weren't exactly going so couth in the United States. Those two Democratic presidents were attempting to prevent a secession by basically appeasing the slaveholders.
Well, it sounds like they succeeded in
They did
preventing the
succeed,
secession.
yes.
So
But both of them only did one term because it sounded like nobody really wanted to mess with that again. They're like, look, I don't want to be responsible for any kind of potential civil war.
yeah, they didn't want to be the president that went down at the start of the Civil War. That makes sense.
Exactly. Under their leadership, the United States split pretty much right down the center of the nation in support for the institution of slavery or opposing the institution of slavery. These tensions came to a boil in Kansas, of all places, because at this point,
I forget that state exists.
Well, and it's in the 1850s, it's the hotbed. Because one big thing happened. So prior in the 1820s, you have the Missouri Compromise, which basically says anything over the 3630 parallel north, that's no slave zone. Anything south, slave zone. Okay. Minus Missouri, which they allowed to be a slave state.
So just drawing arbitrary lines like we want to do.
We are drawing arbitrary lines. Once those arbitrary lines are drawn to appease the South even more, the Nebraska Kansas Act in 1854 split the territory in two and allowed the territory to decide its own fate. We will
states'
let it
rights.
To be, yeah, states' rights.
Ish.
Your vote to determine whether or not the people settling there want slavery or don't want slavery. Their choice. So this led to the hotbed issue where everybody's running to Kansas to pack the ballots, so to speak. You have the Free Staters led by John Brown. We talked about him a couple weeks ago on our This Week in History. Against the Border State Ruffians led by U.S. Senator Johnny David Rice Atchison. So
Border State Ruffians sounds like an early baseball team.
It does sound like a early baseball team. It might have actually been one. Since the 1854 hostilities broke out, it eventually led to open combat where both sides were murdering each other in open combat, in guerrilla warfare tactics.
So, I mean, but there's not a war. They're just murdering each other.
Yeah, this is just civilians murdering each other.
With gang the federal government, basically.
Yes, with the federal government stepping in, trying to calm everything down by like, hey guys, can we just not shoot each other for 5 minutes?
Could we stop, please?
Can we stop?
And they're like, no. We're going to do this for 5 years.
The hostilities led from 1854 and will continue past, while we're going on right now, they will continue. During this time period, at least 56 would be killed and an additional up to 200 wounded. So not the most peaceful time to live in Kansas. probably why they called it Bloody Kansas or Bleeding Kansas.
I mean, it's got to be one of the most dangerous times to live in Kansas, right? Like, Native Americans aside,
yeah,
obviously.
Well, we took their uninhabited Native American territory and split it up for this territorial dispute. At the same time, in 1857, we have the Dred Scott decision. That's where the Supreme Court decided that when the Missouri Compromise was talking about civilians and citizenship, they weren't talking about black people.
No, of course not.
And so it upheld that the entire territories, any territory in the United States, is open to slavery. That's territory, not state.
Sure.
So then this split the Democrat Party right down in twine. So we're up to the 1860 election. You have the Northern Democrats who live up in the North, who are, for the most part, moderate in the slave issue. That doesn't mean they're against slavery.
Right.
What it means is that they want to curb the spread of slavery based on the individual territories' voting rights. Let them decide their own fate, and we'll go from there.
Right. So, I'm guessing the idea behind that was slavery is just going to fizzle out if we just continue to let states go, or it's at least going to fizzle far enough out of my life that I don't have to be concerned about it.
Basically, even if you were a Democrat living in the North, while you weren't necessarily opposed to the slave issue, you didn't really care if it expanded or didn't expand. It wasn't your wheelhouse.
Okay.
And they knew that you could not win an election without carrying at least New York or Pennsylvania. You're not going to be able to do that in 1860 in support of the Dred Scott decision that said slavery can go wherever the hell it wants in the new territories.
Sure.
So the Southern Democrats take the opposite approach. They are what's called the fire eaters, and they believe the Dred Scott decision is law. They believe the Supreme Court is right. They believe slavery is protected by the Constitution and should be spread wherever it wants to be spread. No votes, no choice, any new territory, slavery is legal game.
Just that's it. Like, not leave it to the territories.
No.
You establish a territory and you can have slaves all you want, and that's
that territory. Yep.
That's the other extreme, yeah.
That's the other extreme. So this led to the first DNC convention, which, we had them all the way back then. They have them in modern days now. And
were they better organized back then, or has it always been a clusterfuck?
Well, the first one in 1860 happened on April 23rd, and they failed to elect a candidate. And they failed to elect a candidate because most of the votes went to Stephen A. Douglas, who was a Northern Democrat.
Okay.
Who believed that it should be the states' or the territories' rights to determine their own fate. He did not carry a 2/3 majority, though. The fire eaters, which comprised 50 congressmen, blocked the 2/3 majority and refused to vote for him. After 3 separate ballots, no consensus was made. The 50 free staters decided to hell with it, and they left.
And so that's that. And so what? So do they have to have another convention, or where do they go from there?
There's another convention that's held in Baltimore this time. In June of 1860, the Northern Democrats decide that they will allow the Southern Democrats to come back in and vote, although they don't show up. And the Northern Democrats decide, we don't need them, we'll vote without them. We'll have a consensus of 2/3 of who is sitting here at the table. They vote Stephen Douglas.
I mean, no doubt.
The fire eaters, Prospector, they're not having it. They hold their third and final convention where they elect their own individual candidate, who is Breckinridge, John C. Breckinridge.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have 3 parties.
Which is great, because that's what America really, a true democracy is going to have multiple parties. And so having 3 parties obviously is good for the American people because they have a broader array to choose from.
They will have a broad array to choose from. And they'll actually have a 4th party because the Republicans, who are a new party led by Abraham Lincoln, and really promoted the whole abolitionist movement at this time, had gained speed over the last several elections. And they took that pretty much from the previous Whig party. These Whigs broke off, came their own constitutional party called the Constitutional Union Party, who decided that, listen, we're going to avoid a possible secession of the Confederate States by merely not acknowledging the slavery issue at all. We're just going to ignore it. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to take a side. We're just going to ignore it 100%. So next week,
so they're kind of taking on a, well, what's the issue type approach to it. Like,
we're just not going to acknowledge it.
It's not worth addressing.
So next week at the election, you're going to have your choice of 4 separate candidates. Who knows how it's going to turn out? There is, at this time, a veteran of the Mexican-American War by the name of Ulysses S. Grant, honored himself during the Mexican-American War, who said, "Ugh, I really don't think a Republican president is going to be a great idea because I don't see how a Republican president can avoid hostilities." We'll find out next week what happens and who gets elected.
I really hope they avoid hostilities.
Thanks for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe. Join us next week when we talk about the presidential election of 1860, and follow us on our other episodes on Historic Hindsight or This Week in History.